10, number 8. Assume that the position of a nation's aggregate demand curve has not changed, but the long-run equilibrium price level has declined. Other things being equal, which of the following factors might account for this event? Well, let's draw our long-run aggregate supply curve and our aggregate demand curve together, and that'll help us to address each of these variable changes. There's our framework. Long-run aggregate supply, and then aggregate demand. There we go. We have observed a price level decrease without aggregate demand changing. Well, if we're starting here, how can this decrease if this isn't changing? It could only decrease if long-run aggregate supply increases. Which corresponds to real economic growth. We have more output, and we're paying less for our goods and services, all else held constant, that is. Right there. So the question is, how could this happen? That's all that this question means, is of the things listed here, what corresponds to real economic growth? What were our determinants of aggregates, long-run aggregate supply? What were the things that make it shift? This was the same as our production. We could get these from our production function. Our production function for an economy is output or income, either one. You can use them interchangeably. Is a function, we use a fancy little f there, don't we? Of labor, capital, natural resources, and human capital, all improved by technology. So there's our production function. So for this to have happened, at least one of these things must have increased for this outcome that we're looking for. So now we go down our list and we ask ourselves, does that sound, each of these things, does that sound like one of these things increasing? The first one I would say is the hardest one. Letter A is an increase in labor productivity. Now, here I have an L, and the author is saying an increase in labor productivity. Labor productivity is worker output per hour. So if we hold constant the labor, we're not talking about more laborers. We're talking about laborers being able to do more. That could be attributed to an increase of any one of the other things. You could have the same workers making more if they have more tools, if they know how to better, if we learn how to do a process better, or if we can mine some more natural resources for the workers to use. That could increase labor productivity. Any of those things I just mentioned would accomplish this. So letter A is a yes. And whenever you're doing short answer, which you should note to yourself is why. Just don't write yes, or it doesn't help you probably to actually understand this in the future. So you should say yes, that could result in the greater output and lower price level because workers can use other resources to produce more per hour. Something like that is what you want to note to yourself to make a good study guide of your homework. Letter B, a decrease in the capital stock. Capital stock is represented here with a K. What would a decrease in the capital stock do? That would not increase long-run aggregate supply and yield this lower price level that we have observed. Instead, that would decrease long-run aggregate supply. which would result in a higher price level. So B is a no, because that would increase the price level. And we're looking for decreases in the price level. That was what we were given in the question. Letter C, a decrease in the quantity of money in circulation. Does anybody see any kind of an M or an MS in there for money or money supply? I don't think so. These are the productive resources in an economy. Output is a function of these things improved by technology. There's no money in there. A change in the money supply affects consumption or investment. Those are the determinants of aggregate demand. So there's no reason to expect this to change aggregate supply at all. This is a shifter of aggregate demand. So your answer should be something like, well, it should be no, with something like that would change aggregate demand, not long-run aggregate supply. Or no, money is not a productive resource. Something like that is why the answer is no. Letter E, the discovery of new mineral resources used to produce various goods. What does that N stand for in my production function? Natural resources. And this is a discovery of that. So that's more natural resources in the production of goods and services. So that indeed would look like this. So that's a good old yes for letter E. It would lead to the outcome we see here. And you could say because the economy can produce more, so prices would fall. Something like that. Or because that increases long-run aggregate supply, pushing down on prices when aggregate demand is constant, as is what we're looking for in the question. And then the last one, letter F, a technological improvement. Well, right there is T, and that stands for technology. That is the knowledge of how to produce things. That's different than the skill level of the workers, by the way. But this is the knowledge of how to do it, the general knowledge. Once somebody figured out how to make the wheel, the world knew how to make the wheel. That was a technological improvement. So when there's a technological improvement, with the resources we have, we can make more goods and services. So that would yield this kind of an outcome, including the observed lower price level. So that's a yes, because technology improves production. Or your because would be something like that. Technology is part of the production function. Something like that would be a good explanation for why letter F is also a yes. And that's the end of the question.